The first game I ever played, owned, beat, replayed, and replayed was Pokemon Blue. This is the game that single-handedly got me into the world of video games as a 7-year-old, as was the case for countless other 90s kids, and continues to be with new iterations of Pokemon to this day. Although I was actually first introduced earlier that summer by watching the show and getting some of my own first cards. I have so many memories associated with the early days of Pokemon, but for whatever reasons, I fell off around Gen 3 of Pokemon and kind of gaming as a whole. But even after that, I still had a strong love for Pokemon. I'd still play Gens 1 and 2 every now and again, had thousands of cards, introduced my wife when we were just dating to the Pokemon show, and even proposed with homemade Pokemon cards. But then after my gaming sabbatical, I was able to pick right back up with Mario and Zelda and a bunch of other franchises, but not quite with Pokemon. But in a crazy turn of events, last week we saw the first trailer for new Pokemon Snap, and tomorrow we'll get even more Pokemon news of some sort. And if the announcements in there are anything like what Pokemon Snap is, I'm very excited, and not just for nostalgia. You may wonder why you're seeing lapsed Pokemon fans excited for Pokemon Snap, or maybe you're there too and don't quite understand why. Well, hear me out, because I know the answer for me, and I'm pretty sure I'm not alone. Let's talk about it. Throughout this video, I'll make reference to another one on this channel that AJ made several weeks back, called The Pokemon Game Identity Problem and How to Fix It. Once you're done with this video, I implore you to watch that one, because not only do I think it's one of the best videos ever made on this channel, but it'll help fill in some gaps and give context from a current and active Pokemon fan who has always had a very level head about what Pokemon is versus what it could be. And exactly that is a big part of it. Pokemon fans run the gamut from 5 to 50-year-olds, gals and guys, pro gamers to noobs, community gamers to solo players. There's no one unified identity to Pokemon fans, and it's not a sliding scale of fandom, it's a multi-Venn diagram. What Pokemon is versus what it could be just isn't as simple as we'd think. This is a realization that's taken me a while to come to, and to put it into context, whereas AJ loves to play games online, and in this case, raid, battle, and trade, I just don't care. Even as a kid, all those memories of Pokemon Blue, it's not of trading or battling Pokemon or playing next to friends, it's of playing at home after school or playing in the car trying to catch some light from some street lamps. I traded cards with my friends and we talked about Pokemon all the time, but the game for me was a single player activity. And for me, outside of couch co-op, that's largely how gaming is continued. While I'll get to how Pokemon Snap factors into this, I think it's important to elaborate on its differences with the mainline Pokemon games by saying this: the mainline games are not primarily intended to be single-player games. It took me a while to come to terms with that, and you can feel free to disagree if you'd like. It was talking to AJ and watching some of his videos that helped me land on this position, and it's been reinforced by some other things that I've noticed specifically throughout the marketing of Pokemon's Sword and Shield. But hear me out. If you disagree, you may very well be saying, "What are you talking about, Parker? I played Pokemon Shield for 45 hours completely single player and was perfectly happy. There were bosses, and I had to grind, and there was a story. That's a single player RPG if ever I've seen one." And if that's how you feel, I'd say that's awesome. I felt very similarly with other Pokemon games until I became a bit disenchanted with the formula and took a step back. If we look at the response to Pokemon Sword and Shield, most people that aren't explicitly Pokemon fans but came back to try to give the series a new chance ended up being fairly critical of it being simplistic or easy or needing more time in the oven. And if the single-player campaign had been the main priority of that game, then yeah, I would agree, and frankly did to an extent. But what if it's not? What if the single player in Pokemon is as much the main mode as the story mode in Splatoon 2, or Call of Duty, or Mario Maker 2, or as the mini-games are in Pokemon Stadium? Then frankly, this is an astounding amount of content for it not to be the primary focus. And moreover, it's still a fantastic introductory RPG like Pokemon Blue was for me back in the day. But now, as a 28-year-old who has been good and introduced to RPGs already, is that what I want? We were all hoping that Pokemon Sword and Shield would be the Breath of the Wild of Pokemon, but in a game without a singular focus and with a ton of varied expectations, what does it even mean to fulfill the metaphor of reinventing the wheel to be the best game the series has to offer? And I think the answer in reality is splitting up the game into separate experiences. A single player one that has a focus on story, interesting progression, and collecting Pokemon, and then an external one that's just focused on battling, but being the best possible battling game it can be. And then other well-curated experiences like New Pokemon Snap. So now, I'm very hopeful not just for New Pokemon Snap, but for what it means for Pokemon as a whole. A week ago, AJ made another video about how Pokemon Snap could be the path forward for Pokemon from a production standpoint, working with more teams, carrying over assets, and so on. And I'll add to that by stating what I think this new game is likely to bring to the table that is the Breath of the Wild for Pokemon. First off, let's look at marketing. This is, after all, how a company best conveys their target audience. To compare Pokemon Sword and Shield to Pokemon Snap, Sword and Shield trailers always had a split focus of a new character or two, some new Pokemon to collect, and maybe a bit of story. But so much of the marketing material would focus on new Pokemon's abilities, new moves, battle readiness. It always had a subtle feel more akin to patch notes for Super Smash Bros. Than it did of exploring a world. And that's not a bad thing, it's just even more evidence that the game, at its highest level of engagement, isn't intended for exploration or story, it's for collaborative and competitive multiplayer gameplay. But now let's take a look at New Pokemon Snap. Just like the original, the game is focused on the experience of Pokemon in their natural habitat. If it's anything like the original, some of the logic may be kind of weird, like a Charmeleon evolving into Charizard by being pushed into lava. But the point isn't how to use these Pokemon in battle, it's observing and interacting with them within their environment. If you were to ask gamers what video game world they'd want to inhabit, given the option, I think a large portion would answer the Pokemon world. There's nostalgia there, sure, but it's also just an interesting world that isn't out to get us. And the professors all show there's a huge aspect of wonder and discovery around every corner, and no two experiences are just the same. This is the kind of thing that the anime has shown time and again. Some famous ones like beating Brock's Onix with a sprinkler and Thundershock, or AJ's Sandshrew being impervious to water, telling Pokemon to use more than just 4 moves. The world is meant to be dynamic, and while I'd love that to be observed in the combat as well, Pokemon Snap is a huge step towards doing that in general. The gameplay, although primitive at face value, also contributes to this immersion. Even though the Charmeleon lava thing is kinda dumb, that's exactly what we need, and it only happens because of the player's involvement. When I mentioned the Breath of the Wild of Pokemon before, this is one of those key pieces. Something that a lot of great games have done is not just give you a great experience, but give you the ingredients to create great experiences yourself. Some of my favorite examples in Breath of the Wild are when a Moblin doesn't have a weapon to pick up, so they grab a Bokoblin and swing him around by the legs. Or if you take a Bokoblin's weapon and he picks up a Korok leaf that you place down and he tries to use that as a weapon. Or dropping a Cuckoo in front of a Hinox so that he hits it and it calls over all its friends and they beat him to a pulp. These are things that make really interesting experiences, and as long as Pokemon Snap is following in the footsteps of its predecessor, this is the kind of stuff we can expect from it as well. And truth be told, although the sales of the game don't speak to its quality, if it can knock these interactions out of the park, then it will sell well, which then does reflect back on its tenure. Think of all the experiences and surprises that were shared online at the onset of Animal Crossing New Horizons. Surely its continued commercial success is due in part to the conversation around it for months after release. But to wrap it all up, I want to touch on the logical conclusion of these two states. On one hand, Pokemon as it is really isn't what I'd like it to be, and I don't think that has any intention of changing that part of what it is. But on the other hand, Pokemon Snap is showing promise toward a new future of reinvigorated Pokemon experiences. So in my ideal world, what's next? I really do think that if the Pokemon Company wants ultimate success with Pokemon games and to truly please everyone, the only way is to divide and conquer. Right now, the mainline games are doing their best to be a jack of all trades and are unfortunately not quite a master of most. Some casual fans prefer the catching focus of Let's Go, others prefer the competitive of Sword and Shield, others still would like more story or more exploration or more mini-games. The list goes on. I would love to see the announcement tomorrow or an announcement down the road of a Pokemon Stadium platform. And to be frank, this isn't a solution for what I want, it's the solution to give space for what I want. And what I mean to say is, if this is the perfect place for an online battling community, then frankly, the mainline games don't need to occupy that full space anymore. It would also be the return of another lapsed Pokemon IP, of which there are plenty. But perhaps this would make room for what many of us really want, which is a dedicated Pokemon single-player RPG that may have a casual mode, but is catered to those fans who started back with Blue and Red, I guess, and truly want to experience the world of Pokemon in a way that feels close to what it should be, which is not easy and candy-coated all the time. It's filled with actual difficult choices, difficult battles, and engaging mechanics. And to that point, I think the battling mechanics could be any number of things. It could even be more turn-based, but get rid of forgetting moves, because that doesn't really make sense anyway. Or it could be more action-oriented, like Final Fantasy VII Remake, or Ni no Kuni, or Xenoblade. The only reason we're tied to this battle system is because there is a legacy behind it that needs to be upheld. But if the mainline games were no longer the center for that legacy, then we can finally change it. Imagine if a Pokemon game were designed from the standpoint, first and foremost, if I lived in the Pokemon world, what would my adventure look like? That idea is really exciting to me. Don't start from the mechanics that we already have, start from scratch, see what you come up with. I really love the world of Pokemon, and I think a lot of others do too, outside of just the core fan base. And I can't wait to have more ways to experience it in a new and fresh way, and I'm sure you are as well. But that's what I think. What do you think? What are the ways in which you would like to see the Pokemon formula change or stay exactly the same? Let me know all that and more in the comment section down below. We'll pull some of those comments and talk about them on our podcast this week. Also, if you have any questions you'd like me or AJ to answer, go ahead and join our Discord, and you can ask on the podcast questions section there, and we'll answer them, because that's what we do. All right, that's it for me. See y'all around.